My name is Suhani Desai, and this presentation is on Scott Kelly's Year in Space. Also, this channel is part of a nonprofit organization called One World, One Nation that strives to support children globally who lack educational resources or are disadvantaged. By providing these students with an extended learning platform, they can explore their interests, build on their passions, and find a path to a career. Please subscribe to this channel and like this video in order to support our initiative. The information for our organization is in the description box below. On March 27, 2015, Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko left for the International Space Station in order to spend a year in space. A third astronaut, Gennady Padalka, also launched, but he was not part of the year-long mission. Scott Kelly was chosen to go on the mission because he was experienced and had not yet reached his radiation capacity. NASA has a lifetime radiation limit for its astronauts so that they can keep them as safe as possible. Since Scott Kelly met the parameters, he was sent on the mission along with Russia's Mikhail Kornienko. This mission was established because it allowed NASA to see how an extended time spent in space would affect an astronaut's health and mental well-being. This information was also important for testing out the viability of a future Mars mission. Beyond Kelly's experience and limited exposure to radiation, there was another reason he was a great candidate for the mission. He has a twin brother. His twin, Mark Kelly, is also an astronaut and shares his DNA. Therefore, by observing Scott in space and Mark on Earth, scientists could see the changes that an extended period of time in space would have on Scott Kelly's genes. Before going on missions, astronauts have to train. Training includes using simulators to practice doing things like docking, piloting, spacewalking, and using the robotic arm. These simulations allow astronauts to practice safely so that they know what to do when they're in space. It's important for them to practice because when they go to space, there's no room for error. NASA also has the biggest indoor pool in the world, which is over 200 feet long and 40 feet deep. They use it to help astronauts train by simulating weightlessness and spacewalks. They also use specialized planes to help train astronauts to pilot rockets and fly to the space station. Before launching, the astronauts also have to isolate for a couple of weeks. That's because they have to make sure that they don't bring any germs or viruses with them. If astronauts were to get sick in space, it would be really bad. That's because it would quickly spread in an enclosed space, such as the International Space Station. This is just a basic example of how astronauts prepare before going to space. It applies to all astronauts, but especially Scott Kelly because he went to space for such a long time. We know that when an astronaut goes to space, they can experience certain changes to their bodies. For example, a loss of bone and muscle mass. But no one knew exactly what would happen during an extended time spent in space. They had guesses, but they weren't 100% sure. And that's where the year in space comes in. As we talked about earlier, the purpose of the year in space was to see what might happen to astronauts during a mission to Mars, which would be about 3 years long. As we also talked about earlier, Scott Kelly was chosen for this mission because he has an identical twin brother, Mark Kelly. NASA was able to compare Scott with Mark, and NASA also published a study with the results of their experiments and tests, and I'll talk about some of their findings. So most of the changes that NASA observed went away within 6 months of Scott's return to Earth, but some of them still have not reversed. And one of these changes that did not return to normal happened to Scott's carotid arteries. The carotid arteries are two large blood vessels in the neck that supply blood to the head and brain. After his time in space, it became inflamed and thickened due to a buildup of fat, calcium, and cholesterol. This is bad because the blockage can lead to strokes if blood is cut off from the brain. Scientists believe that it became inflamed due to stress put on his body in space. As of the end of the study, NASA did not know whether or not it was reversible. And another change that was permanent occurred to his eyes. Being in space caused a fluid to build up in his eyes. That's because there's no gravity in space, which prevents the fluid from draining. The fluid was made up of a protein called AQP2. Being in space also causes damage to eye tissue and blood vessels. Another eye change that can occur is increased pressure on the back of the eyeball. This results in the back of the eyeball flattening and the optic nerve sticking out, as you can see in the diagram. And one of the changes that did reverse was to Scott's gut microbiome. A microbiome is bacteria that live in your gut, or stomach and intestines. Having a healthy microbiome is important because it helps to digest food and to keep you healthy. We eat foods with probiotics like yogurt because they contain healthy bacteria that help our guts. While in space, Scott experienced a change to his microbiome. Scientists are not completely certain as to why this change occurred, but one of the reasonings is that he was eating different food than what he would eat on Earth. His microbiome returned back to normal after returning to Earth, most likely because his diet returned back to normal. And another change that went back to normal and when he returned to Earth was to his weight. So while in space, Scott lost 7% of his body mass. There are a few reasons that contributed to this loss. While in space, he was doing more exercise and had a more structured diet. Additionally, he was eating 30% fewer calories than what he was anticipated to eat. He also lost muscle and bone mass due to the fact that there's no gravity. These conditions added up to the loss of body mass, but he was able to gain back his body mass once he returned to Earth. Speaking of which, what did Scott do once he returned to Earth? Well, once Scott Kelly returned to Earth, he did not feel completely normal until 8 months later. He had made a massive sacrifice for the sake of science, and because of his year in space, we now know more about how long-term space travel can affect one's body. And in March of 2016, Scott Kelly announced his plans to retire from NASA. If you're interested in learning more about Scott Kelly's year in space and the twin study, then check out the following resources. NASA has a lot of information about the study, as well as information about Scott's time in space. You can also read books about Scott Kelly's year in space, as well as watch numerous documentaries about it.